Good evening. Very, very pleased to see so many people joining us for this talk on the Manchester Ship Canal. Richard's talk is approximately just on an hour, and then we will move straight into questions and answers after that. Richard, welcome to Chiltern Branch and the IWA. Please go ahead. So the screen's all yours.
Thank you very much indeed, and good evening to everybody. So the Manchester, in order to understand how the Manchester Ship Canal came about, it's necessary to look briefly at the history of the rivers in this area and the events that led up to the building of the largest canal in Britain. This illustrated guide was published at intervals during the 7-year construction of the canal. This issue was probably 1892 or 93, but apart from anything else, really, the adverts are worth looking at. Thomas Steers, who was the engineer responsible for Liverpool Docks, drew this map of the Mersey and Irwell rivers, and it was he who carried out the improvements in the early 18th century, which involved dredging and the building of locks and shortcuts. You can appreciate the need for, shall we say, the Butchersfield cut, saving over a mile of travel. With a 35-mile subject, it is difficult to portray it in one meaningful image. So I'll just move along a bit, and there's another much-needed shortcut here at Sandy Warp's Lock. And oh, would you please remember Sticking's Lock? We shall see it again. And so by 1734, ships of moderate size could reach Manchester. In 1761, the first canal of the industrial age was built to link the Duke of Bridgewater's coal mines in Worsley with Castlefield in Manchester. 15 years later, they extended the canal to Runcorn in direct competition to the Mersey and Irwell Company. So here it is, the Bridgewater Canal. It opened to Manchester in 1761, crossing the River Irwell at Barton, of course, using Brindley's new aqueduct. And then in 1776, it was linked through to Runcorn. Well, first of all, to the Trent and Mersey Canal, newly built, and then also to Runcorn itself. In response, the Mersey and Irwell Company built the Latchford and Runcorn Canal in 1804 to protect their interests, but really it was too little and too late. Because in 1844, the Bridgewater trustees bought the Mersey and Irwell on the principle, I think, if you can't beat them, buy them. And within 30 years, the Bridgewater Navigation Company was created. Okay, so that's the prehistory bit over. In 1870, Manchester faced depression. Half the cost of a ton of goods to India was dock charges and handling in Liverpool. It was cheaper to send by rail to the East Coast and ship from Hull. Perhaps the Bridgewater Navigation Company was formed as a result of this. In 1877, Mr. Hamilton Fulton proposed the brilliant idea of using a tidal navigation all the way to Manchester. There was one minor problem. The docks would be at the bottom of a 60-foot hold. Edward Leader Williams, he was a leading canal engineer. He came to the Bridgewater Navigation Company when it was formed in 1872. And 9 years later, he proposed that the canal should be half tidal and half locked, and then improve this to the canal we know today. And on the 27th of June, 1882, Daniel Adamson convened a meeting at his home, to which he invited 76 of the most influential and wealthy men of the area. A proposal was put and met with general enthusiasm. A committee was formed, which became the Manchester Ship Canal Company, with Adamson as their chairman. it was decided to obtain an Act of Parliament. A bill was drawn up. But it proved difficult to get through Parliament. In 1883, the first bill was rejected in the Commons. The next year, the second was rejected by the Lords, concern really over damage to the estuary of the Mersey. And then the third bill was successful after the decision was taken to extend the canal along the coastline as far as Eastham. And the company was tasked with raising £7 million. Well, Adamson was a good innovator, but he wasn't a financier. He resigned, and he actually didn't live to see the completion of his canal. He died in January 1890. But he was succeeded by Lord Egerton of Tatton, who led the fundraising, and it took him 2 years. Oh, yeah, incidentally, and absolutely nothing to do with the ship canal at all. Egerton's wife was Alice Ann Temple Nugent Bridges Chandos Grenville. One heck of a surname. Signing cheques and letters took an awful long time. Talking of cheques, one of the chapters in the Act that the Manchester Ship Canal Company had to buy the Bridgewater Canal and all its undertakings. And the assessed value was £1,710,000. And the cheque survives to this day. It was at the time the largest cheque ever written. The value today, well, you'd have to multiply it by 100, £171 million. The total cost of the canal was estimated to be 9 million. The actual cost was 15.5 million. But I'm going to get on with the practical details. At the opening ceremony on the 11th of November 1887, Lord Egerton cut the first sod on the site of the lock at Eastham, and he hefted it into a barrow which Edward Leader Williams then wheeled a short distance away. After the ceremony was over, the lump of earth was cut up and there was a scramble to obtain a piece of history. Thomas Andrew Walker was appointed as the contractor. He had plenty of experience with large civil engineering projects. He built the Metropolitan and District Railways in London and the Severn Railway Tunnel. He estimated it would take 4.5 years. It actually took 6 years. Canal building techniques had advanced considerably since the days of the original canal builders, who each had a complete kit for digging a canal: a spade, a barrow, and a plank. Now they had steam and railways. 700 men were employed initially, which grew steadily. And I think, as is obvious from this photo, health and safety was still in its infancy. No barriers, no notices, no stripy tape. Walker built towns for the workers. Admittedly, the conditions were a mite primitive. For instance, this was the main sewer, and child labour was an accepted practice in those days. I wonder how old this one is. Mind you, his attitude does look fairly uncompromising. The canal was divided into 8 sections, which were worked on simultaneously, with the exception of those first 2. They were built consecutively because it was required by the Act that either Ellesmere Port or Runcorn Docks should be accessible during the construction of the canal, and they commenced work on the Eastham section. Leader Williams specified that the 60-foot rise to Manchester should be achieved with 4 paired locks after Eastham. That's Latchford, Earlham, Barton, and Mode Wheel. The plant included 100 steam excavators. We'll meet those French and German navvies a little bit later. 173 locomotives, 6,300 wagons, 228 miles of temporary railway, and there were 15,500 men and boys and 196 horses, and you'll see one of those in a moment. So let's start on our journey. On our way in, we visit Eastham by the Arrow, and then Mount Manistee and Ellesmere Port, before moving on to Runcorn. So in the estuary outside Eastham, they deepened the approach to the canal. A bank which is just visible in the background kept the river at bay. And there's a pair of steam excavators. We can close in. We're working away, and those machines were capable of shifting 2,500 tons a day, rather more than a spade and a barrow. And here they're dumping the spoil into horse-drawn trucks. I did promise you a horse. Eastham locks are in the background. We'll go over there now. To give you some idea of scale, here's a man at the point of the arrow. These gates are 36 feet tall because they have to cater for the 14-foot tidal rise and fall, as well as the depth of the approach channel. Benjamin Williams Leader, R.A. He was born Benjamin Leader Williams, but as he became well known as an artist, people started to confuse him with his already famous engineer brother, Edward, and so he swapped his surname round. He made several paintings of the canal, and this is one of them. During the excavation works here at Frodsham, the spoil was dumped in on the Pool Hall rocks in the distance over there. And the workers started to call that dump Mount Manistee. He was the quite popular manager of this section, Edward Manistee. Here's the mount after the canal was opened. It's still there today, variously described as a striking feature with considerable elevation, and also reportedly bleak and pockmarked with rabbit holes. Ellesmere Port Lighthouse, you can see it there, was built in 1802 to guide ships into the port from the Mersey, which is now beyond that bank in the embankment which will form the edge of the canal. 5 of the 13 miles between Eastham and Runcorn were built in this way. An embankment was created along the edge of the estuary, and this became the bank of the canal. It hasn't yet reached its full height because you can see a steam engine pulling trucks which will be depositing more rock and soil on the bank. The contractors had a certain amount of fun in 1891 when they came to close the gap in the embankment which had been used for those craft still accessing the Ellesmere port. The tide broke through. The next day they tried again with rocks and piles, which also failed. And the gap was finally closed with layers of concrete in a 30-hour non-stop operation ending on the 14th of July. The canal was flooded and boats started using the canal 2 days later. Now work on the Runcorn section could start because Ellesmere Port was again available for use. I did mention the 228 miles of very temporary railway, which occasionally became so temporary that engines were derailed. I believe it was not uncommon happening, and a system using very long crowbars was developed to rectify the situation. But this rather evocative photo, on the side of the hut, there is a notice. Let's close in slightly. It's about a special service in memory of Mr. Walker. Thomas Walker died on the 25th of November 1889. He was just 62 years old. This was his memorial service. His workers were fiercely loyal to him. He was a good and fair boss. He set up 3 hospitals and first aid stations along the line of the canal, and Walker continued to employ anyone injured in his service if it was at all possible. They were collectively called Walker's Fragments. And here is one of them. You can see the full psalm there. Much of the credit for the medical care should go to Robert Jones, though, the surgeon superintendent. It was his idea to set up the hospitals and first aid posts. which were all connected with a dedicated railway to speed up the transport of injured men. It was he who invented the triage system of today. Figures showed that during the 6 years of work on the canal, 130 men lost their lives and 165 were left with a permanent disability, and just under 1,000 were slightly injured, as it's described. The entrepreneur early hotel owners gathered. Here is a floating Hilton. A labourer was paid about £1, that's £100 today, £1 a week, spending 13 shillings on food and lodging. After Walker's death, there were delays due to bad weather, and repeated flooding caused serious setbacks. And by early 1891, the canal company had run out of money, with only half the construction work completed. They were forced to seek financial help from the Manchester Corporation in order to avoid bankruptcy. The required funds were approved and released by the corporation in March of that year, in order to preserve the city's prestige. 13,000 piles were sunk to stabilise that 10-mile embankment built in the estuary between Runcorn and Eastham. And the Runcorn Widnes Railway Bridge in the background was completed in 1869. So the canal had to thread its way through that first gap there between the abutment and the first pier. By 1893, Runcorn Docks were again in use. This was as far as these vessels could go, because Runcorn Railway Bridge stopped the passage of any craft in excess of 75 feet. And sailing ships transferred their cargo to barges here for onward transmission. The view is over the bottom gate of the Runcorn branch of the Bridgewater Canal. So the canal was initially built 26 feet deep and 120 foot wide at the bottom, although it did narrow at Runcorn to pass through that railway arch. In 1909, the depth was increased to 28 feet, and it's still that today. Here's the other side of that railway bridge. This, by the way, is a temporary dam to carry the railway for trains dumping rock and soil on the new embankment. So from Runcorn, we move on to Latchford, and then to Caddis Head and Earlham, and then Barton, the Bottom Aqueduct, and of course Sulfur Docks. The excavator, which I promised you, called the French Navy, was made by Boulay of Paris, and the ship canal had 4 of these machines which dumped the spoil on a truck which ran on the tracks behind. Whereas the German Navy, produced by a company in Lübeck, was larger and more stable than its French counterpart, and as you can see, the trucks for spoil run through the middle of the excavator. At Latchford was the second railway crossing, but here the existing track was at ground level and had to be raised 75 feet onto this new viaduct, which was completed by the end of 1892. The railway owners weren't confident that the viaduct was strong enough, and so they insisted it be tested by running 10 locos out onto the bridge. As you can see, the test is about to start. The engines will be left on the viaduct for a time, and if successful, the railway company would then run good trains on this track for the next 6 months. Only after that would the line be declared safe for passenger trains. And finally, in July 1893, the ground level track, that's behind the photographer here, could be taken up and the canal excavated. And this was completed by October. This is at Caddis Head in May 1889, and these barrow runs show they were still using the older techniques of earth shifting, but with a more modern twist. The men are still pushing barrows, but they are connected to a cable and drawn up the slope by a steam engine out of shot to the right. Oh, and in the foreground, if you look down in the bottom corner here, there is a large hole, and there's an excavator there creating it. I wonder if this hole is the one they dug for the dredger Bollin. This craft was brought to the site in pieces and then built in the hole. Then the hole was flooded, and the floating dredger proceeded to dig its own way out. Here at Partington, the banks of the canal were softer and subject to erosion, and the company brought over some Dutch workmen who showed how to stabilise the bank using fascines, that's large clumps of willow branches pegged to the bank. When the water level was lowered in, 1969 for maintenance work, the fascines were still in as good condition as when they were put into place some 80 years before. And here's another barrow run. It connects the brick factory at Thelwall with the bricklayers requiring bricks at the top of the incline. It's on record that the factory produced 70 million bricks. It was more of a funicular railway. By the way, that viaduct in the background developed structural problems, and it was eventually demolished and replaced by an iron bridge similar to this one, which is just the Board of Trade test of Irwell Rail Bridge over the former course of the river. Earlham locks, they were completed in 1892. This photograph's a little bit earlier than that because the lock is still in course of construction, as you can see here. And the chambers are only half built there, but because the Ship Canal was in parts a flowing river, sluices were necessary to control the flow of water, and you can see one of the gates here has been raised to permit a temporary railway line to be built through. In January 1890, well, Manchester lived up to its reputation. Prolonged rain caused the Irwell and the Mersey the rivers to overflow and break down the dams. This flooded the workings in the bottom of the canal, and this rather literal pile-up was the result of one of those floods at Flixton. Steam enthusiasts among you may like this image of one of the rail-mounted steam cranes and its attendant railway side-tipping truck. If I enhance this to a rather moody level and visit the top right-hand corner up there, you can just make out the remains of the Mersey and Irwell's Stickings Lock. Do you remember that? It was built in 1832 and it's here, complete with its lock cottage, soon to be demolished. I can make also the visit to the crane a little bit more intimate if I close in on the machinery, where you can see the fireman with the arrow and the driver and the anyone know what this bloke does? Answers please. Anyway, we've reached the Bottom Aqueduct. It was built by James Brindley in 1761 on, of course, the Duke of Bridgewater's canal. Technically, this was 3 aqueducts crossing the Barton Lane, and then the River Irwell, and then a footpath here being used by a horse, and finally a rather improbable road bridge. How do you get up and over that? This was an artist's license because it actually looked like that. And here's the original stone aqueduct, 38 feet above the Irwell. It lasted 132 years until 1893, when the river became the Manchester Ship Canal. And that required, of course, a 75-foot air draft. By Act of Parliament, the Bridgewater Canal could not be closed or interrupted. So how to solve the problem? Well, Edward Leader Williams came up with the idea. But before we go to that, let's just come through the arch. We're looking at the upstream side of the Brindley Aqueduct with that rather strange road bridge just beyond. It's arrowed. But here in the foreground is the old Barton Lock, in the course of being dismantled as we watch. But anyway, let's go back to Leader Williams's idea. The work commenced in 1886. Here's Brindley's aqueduct and that pedestrian tunnel. And here they built 2 new tunnels and then diverted the River Irwell through them. Then they built the formwork for a new pier on the bed of the old river through the centre arch of the aqueduct. And that pier is now complete in this photograph. And they've commenced the construction of a large tank on a swivelling base on the far side. This is September 1891. By 1893, both the road bridge in the foreground and the tank in the background are complete. And this is the still existing and at that time still used canal in Brindley's Stone Aqueduct, just 20 feet away from the new tank. But here now straight ahead is the new approach channel to the tank. In May 1893, water was admitted to the channel, something like this, but the channel collapsed and it was repaired by the 21st of August, and the first barges then started to use the new route. And Brindley's Aqueduct could at last be demolished. The tank could be swung for the first time, just to make sure it worked, of course. And the tank was 235 feet long, 18 feet wide, and 6 foot deep, and weighed 1,450 tons. I think this is probably a publicity photograph showing a barge in the tank and a horse on the elevated towpath. We'll come back here on our return journey, but for a moment, have a look at this summary. And here you can see the Bridgewater Canal arrowed, the original course of the Bridgewater with the arrows pointing where the old stone aqueduct used to be, and then the tank swung clear of the channel, the ship canal, the control tower, you can just make it out, and the road viaduct. And just to complete the picture, that's all been opened for the passage of this cargo ship and its attendant tug. In this next 4 images, you can watch the channel being built. In the foreground here is the soon-to-be diverted River Irwell, with the proposed course of the canal stretching into the distance. And gradually the channel is deepened until it's complete and ready for flooding. And the Latchford section was the last to be flooded, and the canal was filled end to end by the 25th of November 1893. These are Sulfur Docks and Pomona Docks as they were originally planned. Pomona Docks were the domestic docks dealing with transfer with the inland waterways system. And I'd like you to remember Manchester Racecourse, please. And this is where the new Trafford swing bridge will be built. And here it is, Trafford swing bridge, and it's still there today, which carries the Trafford Road over the new canal with the old river route at the back there on the right. We'll come back here in a little while. But the first full passage of the ship canal was on the 7th of December, 1893. And the official opening was 3 weeks later, on the 1st of January 1894, when the yacht Norseman, here it is, carrying the directors, led a procession of 71 ships, here going past Bottom Aqueduct. The first cargo ship, it was the Pioneer, owned by the Cooperative Wholesale Society. Queen Victoria formally opened the canal from the yacht Enchantress on the 21st of May 1894. And then she knighted the mayors of Manchester and Salford. Edward Leader Williams and Bosden Leach, who was the company secretary, had to wait several more weeks before they received their knighthoods. And I think this is rather natty suiting for Queen Victoria's visit. I wonder if they're singing "The Big Ship Sails on the Alley, Alley, Oh." They say that song was written about the ship canal. It was soon realised that there weren't enough docks. Manchester Racecourse was bought, and number 9 dock, over half a mile long, was excavated through it. Behind the bank, that kept the canal out of the workings. And the dock was filled gradually, and then the bank was finally destroyed with explosives, while a dredger waited to remove the last traces. The official opening of number 9 dock was on the 13th of July, 1905. This view is taken from the 168 feet high grain elevator, which they built in 1915 at the end of the dock, and it was capable of storing some 40,000 tons of grain. The docks had their own police force and their own fire brigade, which was set up in 1893. The police force actually lasted 100 years until replaced by a security firm in 1993. So this aerial shot shows docks 6 to 9 with the grain elevator there and the railway swing bridge, which connected the dock railways in Trafford on the left and Salford on the right. We've come now to Pomona Docks, handling the domestic cargo. And you can see one of the ubiquitous little packets, as the Bridgewater steam tugs were called. Remember, no craft could exceed 75 feet in height. Here's a cargo ship with truncated masts and funnel, being towed by one of the larger Ship Canal paddle-driven tugs, which also moved the 250-ton floating crane around, here lifting a railway carriage into position or into a ship. In the 1970s, containers and container ships revolutionized the way docks were run, and the docker's job virtually disappeared. In Manchester, they were handling up to 16 million tons a year, but by 1979, Manchester liners were finished, their ships outmoded, and by December 1984, 3,000 docker jobs had disappeared. The cargo handling had halved. 3 years later, the company was bought by Peel Holdings. And in 2013, Peel Ports handled 22,500 containers on the modernised canal, but Sulfur Docks had virtually closed. Peel Ports predict that the number of containers transported along the canal could increase to 100,000 by 2030. In 1983, they tried to demolish the granary and succeeded in making it lean over a little bit. Railways closed in 1984, but some of the Hunslet engines did survive. I don't think that needs any explanation. So as we come up to date, we move into colour. This is Woden Street Footbridge, which marks the meeting of the River Irwell in the foreground and the Ship Canal beyond. In 1994, the Big Ditch, as they called it, was 100 years old. Much of the domestic Pomona Docks have become derelict and filled in. Oh, except number 3, which is where they connected it to the Bridgewater Canal with a new lock, which replaced the old Hume locks, which were further upstream at Castlefield. Do you remember this shot of Trafford Swing Bridge being built? Well, here it is today. Except since this photograph was taken, they've added a new bridge in front of this one, like this. And if I backpedal a few yards, the skyhook comes into view. I think this is a very clever piece of statuary. You can still see the old bridge in the background there. The old rail bridge, which carried the dock railways between Salford and Trafford Park, well, that's now repositioned across number 9 dock, and number 9 dock has been sealed off from the canal. The Mariners Canal was then built to link number 8 dock with number 9 dock in the distance. And they've also built the Lowry Centre with a shopping mall and an art gallery dedicated to Lawrence Stephen Lowry, LS Lowry, who died in 1976. In 2002, they built this lifting pedestrian footbridge across the canal, giving access to the Imperial War Museum on the left there. And the 2011 Media City footbridge, which swings out of the way of boats using the canal. So this is Sulfur Docks today. Well, let's take a quick tour of the bits you've seen. Up here by the arrow, there's Pomona Dock and the lock. And Trafford bridges and the skyhook. And where the railway bridge was originally and where it is today. And Mariners Canal linking numbers 8 and 9 dock. And the Lowry Centre. And the lifting footbridge. And the Imperial War Museum. And the swinging footbridge to Media City. Oh, and just one more. This is where we are going to join the Mersey Ferry to set off on our 35-mile return voyage to Liverpool. This was a suspiciously bright day in 1994 as the Mersey Ferry Mountwood arrived from Liverpool on the Saturday afternoon. But we needn't have worried because by Sunday, as we left, weather conditions had returned to normal. We've cruised the canal 4 times. And every time it's been raining. So we dropped down Mode Wheel Lock and head off on our trip. Here, the Arklow River, some 3,000 tons general cargo carrier. She's a regular visitor to Manchester. She's coming under the Centenary Bridge, a vertical lift bridge connecting the Ship Canal between Eccles on the Salford bank, crossing the Ship Canal, and Trafford Park on the south bank. This bridge, actually it's unique in respect, it's the first low-level bridge to be built over the canal since its opening in 1894. The car scrappage steam in 2009 produced this dock full of steel scrap, waiting to be exported to Portugal. Approaching Barton with the M60 Manchester Ring Road in the distance, they're just swinging the road bridge out of the way. And to follow the sequence today, first of all, the gate swings across the canal, following by the gate sealing the tank. This, of course, is also happening at the other end. And the tank gate is powered by, well, this is what Jim here called mandrolics. And Jim told me that in order to seal the gate, he would empty a tin of sawdust into the water where it would be drawn into any leaks, swell and seal them off. He also told of a tourist lady who asked what he was doing. Well, ma'am, we have a couple of pike in the tank here, and to stop them nibbling the rubber seals, we feed them regularly. I'll leave you to think about that one. Up in the control tower, they put the power on. The electric motors start to whine. And slowly the tank starts to move. It runs clear of the bank and then finally comes to rest along the central pier. Just to remind you, that tank, 235 feet long, 18 foot wide and 6 foot deep, weighing 1,450 tons. And the road viaduct, 700 tons. And the boat comes through. Take a look just there. Just by the bows of the ship. After the ship had passed, we watched them jump in the canal. Up in the control tower, now the view eastward towards Salford is this, and there's one of the Arklow ships at that wharf. And do you remember this etching? Well, note the stonework of Brindley's Aqueduct and compare it with that. Pretty accurate, really. Up on the top there is where the grass is growing, where the original Bridgewater Canal was. And finally turning to look west towards that M60 ring road, which they widened to carry yet more traffic. And they built a new lifting bridge across the canal alongside the M60 to serve a new industrial area. In 2016, that bridge deck collapsed, blocking the canal for 3 months until it was finally broken up and cleared away. Talking of canal blockages, do we remember this? Yes, Evergreen, Evergiven. The Evergiven was the ship name. Evergreen was the company operating. It's all been cleared now, of course. Coming under the Thelwall viaducts, carrying the M6 over the Ship Canal. I wonder how often you sat in a motorway traffic jam there. I certainly have, and I've watched cargo ships pass under me. And they do say there's a ban on breaking wash on the canal. This is Orange Green. It's a superb photograph with a paddle steamer making way and a lot of smoke. Let's close in on that title. Orange Green. There isn't an orange green. It's a great example of Chinese whispers. It's actually Hollands Green. It's now called the Wobberton High Level Toll Bridge. And the toll, 2 and 6pence or 12.5 pence. So into Latchford Lock to drop down to the last level before Eastham. And Latchford High Level Rail Crossing, where we saw the first test with railway engines. There are 2 Mersey ferries here doing what we're doing at the moment, taking a trip along the canal. Just in time, the Northwich Road swing bridge opens to let us through. Schoolboys, well, and girls in Warrington had a regular excuse for being late at school. Sorry, miss, we was bridged. Back in 1998, we might have met this fleet of tugs and narrowboats heading for the Inland Waterways Association National Festival. They were going to Salford Quays, led by 2 ex-Manchester Ship Canal tugs. And while on the subject of those tugs, here's the steam-driven Daniel Adamson, the memorial to the man who led the campaign for the Ship Canal. The tug worked on the canal from 1922 right through to 1984, when it was laid up at Ellesmere Port, falling to bits and a target for vandals. Peel Holdings, rather than scrapping her, sold her for £1 to a recently formed restoration society, and they started work in 2004. Here she is on the way to her restoration at Liverpool Docks. And she's now fully restored and in steam, and she can be seen around the waterways of the northwest. And you can get a ride on her. Back on the Ship Canal, here's a shipload of Guinness and 6 road tankers. That comes to just over 2 million pints of Guinness, by the way. The Lady Patricia was a registered beer tanker with a capacity of 205,000 gallons. This postcard marks the official opening of the Runcorn Transporter Bridge on the 29th of May 1905. And here, the postcard with an early aeroplane, but is it genuine? Or has it been added in the studio? I don't know. Is it painted in? It does bear a remarkable resemblance to this 1910 Bristol box kite. Thank you, Alamy, for that. The railway bridge in the background opened in 1868, and the road bridge, which replaced the transporter bridge in 1961. However, the latest Runcorn crossing looks like this. That opened in 2017. It's about a mile and a bit upstream from Runcorn Bridge. But coming back to this one, I've just got a little story to tell. I was driving over the bridge here when I saw a view I wanted to capture. There was a convenient lay-by just there. So I pulled in and got out of the car. Now I heard Nino, Nino, Nino. Are you in trouble, sir? Well, no, I just want it. You are now, sir. This is an emergency lay-by. Get back in your car and go. I did get my photo of the Arklow River again, though. This is the old quay lock, which was used as a shortcut to the Mersey for barges. And a pair of old lock gates there leaning up against the embankment wall. And on the other side, the 250-ton crane, now used primarily for lifting the lock gates when they need replacement or repair. This is the old entrance lock to the Bridgewater Canal, which rose through 10 locks here, eventually to its junction with the Trenton Mersey. And that house was built in 1771 for the Duke of Bridgewater. But the scenery has changed somewhat. Waterways World sometimes includes little snippets of news. This item was in 2008, telling us that Eddie Stobart was setting up a base at Weston on the Ship Canal, and that the boatmen would be following their road-based colleagues, would wear uniformed shirts and ties like this. So here's a motor and butty setting out to join the canal up there by that church in the background. Very plausible. Perhaps I should tell you, this item appeared in the April edition. But the building is quite genuine. It's Christchurch Western Point. It was built in 1841 for the River Weaver workers. It's the only church on an uninhabited island in the UK. Although, if I widen the shot, you'll see, in fact, that fact followed fiction here. Eddie Stobart built a warehouse on the island in 2010. So these are the Weaver Sluices. The River Weaver flows into the canal on the right, and it needs somewhere to go. And so it flows out again through the adjustable sluices. So let me just take you around Runcorn again. There are the bridges up at the top there. And there is the Bridgewater Canal entrance. And Eddie Stobart is there. And the Weaver Sluices are there. And we are just here. Here we are. A view to the Mersey over millions of rabbit homes. Past Stanlow Oil Port, which was built in 1947, and when it was the largest inland oil terminal after London. And small tankers still offload there today. Passing Ellesmere Port, the entrance to the Shropshire Union Canal. We saw, of course, the dock empty here way back at the start of our journey. The lighthouse was built in 1802 to guide ships in from the Mersey. Don't know why I like that photograph. Perhaps I think it reminds me of War of the Worlds, but this set of cranes have been dismantled anyway, as indeed has this one. It was the dismasting and disfunneling crane at Eastham. If ships arrived with masts or funnels which exceeded the 75-foot limit, the crane removed the offending bits and replaced them with shorter versions. When the ships left the port, they stopped here and asked for their bits back again. So we've arrived back at Eastham Locks, which were the first things we saw being built. So this is the old 150-foot barge lock, and the 350-foot tug lock, the 600-foot ship lock, and the tug parking bay, and finally the much larger Eastham Oil Port, which could cater for tankers up to 800 feet long. But now even this dock is too small. The larger vessels moor up at an offshore terminal. Here you are. Here's the Navy in Oslo at Tranmere, having finished delivering her cargo. But anyway, so we leave the Manchester Ship Canal. Our circle is complete, but shall we cross to Liverpool and finish our Mersey ferry journey? Yes, let's. We land here to arrive in the city of Liverpool, and we transfer to coaches, and we're driven back to Salford, where we started. But let's just stay here just for a few moments. Liverpool is the city with the three graces: the Royal Liver Building, the Cunard Building, and the Port of Liverpool Building. And two cathedrals, the city with a cathedral to spare, both of them built in the 20th century. So here's the liver birds looking down on the 1.4 mile new Liverpool Canal link. Some of you may be in along it. It connects the Leeds and Liverpool Canal to the city's south docks and thence to the Mersey. Cost £22 million. It was opened in March 2009. And here are the liver birds on the Royal Liver Building, or one of them, just a close-up. They're 18 foot tall. They have a 12-foot wingspan, and they're thought to represent a cormorant. The imposing bulk of the Anglican Cathedral, it was started in 1904 and completed 78 years later. It was designed by Giles Gilbert Scott, the architect who was responsible for Battersea Power Station, and the red telephone box. Did you know that inside the Anglican Cathedral there is room for Nelson's column at the crossing, provided he takes his hat off? And the affectionately nicknamed Paddy's Wigwam, the Metropolitan or Catholic Cathedral, started in 1962, completed in 5 years. Designed by Sir Frederick Gibbard, who was also responsible for Harlow Newtown. And with that stunning lantern and the swathe of colour. Enough. You'll have to book a passage on a Mersey ferry if you want more, because I'm going to leave you in a traffic jam on the M60. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. I just hope everybody else found that as fascinating as I did. That was just great. My only contact with the Manchester Shipping Canal was in 2016, when we were lucky enough to join Mike Carter, poor old Mike Carter's last convoy from Ellesmere Port across into Liverpool Docks. So, and I still remember that very, very fondly. Just before we go on to Q&A, those of you that are on here, many of you will be IWA members, many of you will not be. I'd just like to say that if you don't know, it's an organisation run entirely by volunteers, and
Wow.
we will not be embarrassed by any size of contribution or donation you'd like to make to us. You simply have to go onto the same website where you registered, and you're free to give us as much of your money as you feel appropriate for our webinars. As you know, we make no charge for them. Let's move on to questions that have come up so far. We've got a small number of questions so far. Richard, the first was actually a comment. Jeff Buck has pointed out that the Skyhook has been recently reinstated after a 2.5-year refurbishment.
Oh,
so it is there for us to see.
Thank you very much.
It looked pretty good to me in your photograph, but apparently it needed refurbishing. Anne Ryle asks, is the Penny Ferry still operating?
The trouble with talking to Inland Waterways audiences is that they know things which I don't. I can't answer that. I'm sorry. I wish I could.
Well, then let's say, Anne, please feel free to find out and let us know, because we'd be fascinated to be told. Stephen Cox just makes a comment. Richard, thanks. That was superb. And I've got from John Halford. You mentioned an Egerton near the beginning of your excellent presentation. Was he related to Francis Egerton, the Duke of Bridgewater, who instigated the Bridgewater Canal?
He was.
Okay.
Same person.
It was the same person, so a pretty close relationship then.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just trying to think when I mentioned Egerton on its own. Oh, wait a moment. I would need to go back to the beginning and just check out that Egerton mention. Forgive me for the moment. I will check that out. If you leave your email address, I will confirm to you.
If you get the answer back to us, Richard, then they will be posted. So
thank you very much.
Will go to everybody. We have from Les Green. In fact, we've got an answer to one question already. Just shows you the power of these things. From Les Green, he says, yes, the penny ferry still operates. I live in Warrington, but it's more than a penny now.
Lord Egerton was his uncle.
Somebody else has come back and confirmed the same thing.
Thank you for that.
I hope I get this pronunciation right. Antoonval Coily. It is amazing for a city like Manchester to no longer use this superb waterway for its urban logistics, which would alleviate congestion and emission. Well, you're really preaching to converted here, and I guess it simply wouldn't happen in Europe. And Douglas Morgan asks, where are the container ships discharged?
They're obviously not in Sulfur Docks. There are wharves along the sides of the canal as you get in towards Manchester.
From Colin Bird. Now, Colin, just before I ask Colin's question, I want to just thank Colin, because Colin has organised the whole series of webinars that have been hosted by Chiltern Branch of the IWA, and does a great job for us as our branch organiser of talks and trips and all sorts of things. So thank you, Colin. And Colin again asks, where are the containers offloaded? You mentioned, I believe, that container business is planned to increase.
If you go to the Peel Ports website, I think quite probably the answer is there. I shall certainly have a look at it tomorrow.
Right, okay. So anyway, you can see that there are other people who are interested. Can you ask Peel Ports when they're going to paint the swing bridges in Warrington? I guess what colour as well. Phil Page says Mersey ferries seem not to run trips as far as Salford. Is this correct? If so, do you know why?
I've heard this as well, but I haven't checked it out. Well, I don't think they ran anything last year, and not as far as Salford. Was that question?
This might be an answer here from Les Green, who says the canal now in Manchester Docks is badly silted, and the Danny and Mersey ferries can no longer get to their berth at the Lowry.
Really?
That's, I feel, a campaign coming on, guys.
Yes, yes.
I don't know. Ibanez asks, are the photographs presented here, do they belong to a particular collection, or is there anywhere where all these media can be accessed? Accessed.
Well, they can access. I bought a couple of histories, a 2-volume history actually, of the Ship Canal, but by Bosden Leach, the company secretary. It was a very expensive purchase, but it was well worth it, with a series of maps. And if anyone is interested particularly in any one of the images which I've shown, again, if you contact Chiltern or come through to me, I will make sure I can send you a copy.
Direct any queries to me, Chiltern Branch, and I will make sure that's forwarded to Richard for response.
Fine.
And Neil Barnett says, I believe the container ships discharge and load at Earlham Container Terminal.
Right, thank you.
Ronald asks, were the steam excavators only used for the later parts of the work?
I think the answer would have to be yes, because I don't know. Yeah, I can see the point. In other words, they've got to have a hole to work in, to widen the channel.
Yeah, but makes the point. New port facilities are being built at Port Salford near Earlham.
Right.
Somebody's mentioned the problem on the Aylesbury Arm. It's not a problem on the Aylesbury Arm. If you go to the news, there's been there was a tragic CRT, I'm not sure whether it was an employee or volunteer, but CRT person has been murdered on the arm this week. I don't want to say any more about it than that, but that's what I was referring to. There's a whole number of people, names with thumbs up here, Richard. Obviously, a lot of people who enjoyed your talk.
Ah, thank you.
There are issues with the reliability of the locks, etc., which has caused problems for both Danny and Mersey ferries. So another point that's causing problems for them. The Danny is now cruising the Weaver, having reached its berth at Sutton Weaver today. I seem to remember seeing something about that in the Waterways Press. Jeff Buck says the land alongside the original course of the Bridgewater Canal is currently a pocket park, but Peel have recently put forward for planning permission to reinstate the walkway on the Swing Aqueduct and, to develop other public parks and visitor facilities. Well, that sounds very good.
Wow.
I didn't realise Peel Ports had a...
So that's the elevated towpath we're talking about. You've gone very faint.
Sorry, that's because I keep turning away from my laptop. Yeah. Yeah, somebody says that would be great. Are there any more visitor moorings at Salford Quays?
Pass.
Let's close on this one. Daniel Bovey says, many thanks for a fascinating webinar, the best presentation I've seen to date. That seems like a good comment to finish on, Richard.
That's very kind.
Yeah. So thank you all, and thanks for your attendance. I'm going to say thanks again to Richard, and a special thanks to Gemma, one of our very valuable employees at Chesham, as she has actually technically hosted this meeting this evening for us, which was just great, because we had none of our volunteer hosts available, technical hosts available. And just once again, there's no amount of money you can give us that will embarrass us. So thank you all. Thanks very much indeed, and good night.